You see it every spring. That soft green carpet creeping across the shady side of your lawn, spongy under your boot, choking out the grass you paid to grow. And every year you drive to the store and grab another jug of moss killer that promises the world and costs you $30, $40. I did that for 6 seasons straight. 6. Here is what I learned the hard way. That moss on your lawn is not a disease you spray away. It is a message. And the $2 powder sitting in your kitchen right now kills it faster than anything I ever bought in a bottle. No sponsors on this channel, no affiliate links, no products to push, just the cheap tricks I tested, one dead patch at a time in my own backyard, and the ones that actually worked. Stick with me, because near the end, I am going to show you a measured result out of Pacific Northwest turf research that explains why the expensive iron sulfate you have been buying only works for a few weeks and why the cheap fix lasts. And this works on the tired, patchy lawn you already have, not some fresh roll of sod, the exact lawn you are looking at out your window right now. Let me take you back to the corner of my yard that started all of this. Northeast side of the house, under a big silver maple, ground stayed damp till noon every day. By the 3rd year, that corner was more moss than grass. Soft, thick, dark green, almost pretty if it weren't strangling everything I planted. I remember standing there one Saturday morning with a jug in my hand, reading the label, doing the math, and realizing I had spent close to $200 over the years killing something that kept coming right back. That was the moment I got mad enough to start experimenting. So here's the first thing nobody at the store will tell you. Moss does not kill your grass. Moss moves into the empty space where your grass already gave up. Think about that for a second, because it changes everything. For years, I believed the moss was the attacker. I believed if I could just poison it hard enough, my grass would come rushing back to fill the space. It never did. I would kill the moss, the patch would turn black and crusty, and within a few weeks the moss would return like nothing happened. Because I never fixed the reason it was there in the first place. Moss thrives in exactly 4 conditions: shade, compacted soil, poor drainage, and low acidic ground. Every single one of those is a condition where regular lawn grass struggles to survive. So when you see moss, you are really looking at a spot where your grass is losing a fight it was set up to lose. The moss is just the flag planted on the empty ground. Now the lawn industry knows this, they know it perfectly well, but there is no money in telling you to fix your soil, because that is free. There is a lot of money in selling you a jug you have to buy again every single spring. So the message they push is simple: moss bad, buy killer, repeat forever. I am not going to pretend those iron-based moss killers do nothing. They do burn the moss. They turn it black within a day or two, and it looks dramatic and it feels like victory. But burning the top of the moss is like mowing a weed. You knock down what you could see. You did nothing to the reason it grew. And so you are locked into buying that jug every March for the rest of your life. That is where the kitchen powder comes in. And that is where this gets interesting. The powder is baking soda, plain sodium bicarbonate, the same yellow box you have had in your fridge for a decade, absorbing smells. A big box costs about $2, sometimes less if you buy the store brand, and it holds enough to treat every mossy patch in an average yard several times over. Here is why it works, and why it is different from the burn and repeat jug. Moss loves acidic ground. It is built to thrive where the soil pH drops low, down around 5 on the scale, where your grass gets weak and miserable. Baking soda is alkaline. When you dust it onto a moss patch and it dissolves down into that top layer, it spikes the surface conditions the moss depends on. Moss has no real roots and no protective coating like a blade of grass. It absorbs everything directly through its surface. So that sudden shift in its little acidic paradise hits it hard and fast. Within a few days, the moss starts to yellow, then brown, then it loosens its grip and rakes right out. I tested this on that maple corner first. I waited for a damp morning when the moss was still wet with dew, because the powder sticks better to wet moss. I sprinkled a light, even dusting across the patch, about enough to make it look like a dusting of flour, not a thick pile, just a visible white haze over the green, and then I walked away and let it work. 3 days later, that soft green carpet had gone a sickly pale brown. A week later, I raked it, and it came up in sheets, like pulling up an old rug. Underneath was bare, dark soil that had not seen sunlight in 2 years. But here's the tension, and this is the part I need you to understand, before you run outside and dump a box on your lawn. Killing the moss was the easy part. The moss came off in an afternoon. What I was left with was a bald brown patch of dirt. And if I did nothing else, I already knew from 6 years of failure exactly what would happen. The moss would come right back. Because I still had not fixed the 4 conditions that invited it in. So killing the moss was step 1. Keeping it dead was a whole different fight. And that is where almost everybody, including me for years, gets it completely wrong. Let me show you what I mean. After I raked out that first patch, I got cocky. I figured the hard part was done. I threw down some grass seed on the bare dirt, watered it, and waited for my thick green lawn to return. Most of that seed did nothing. A few thin blades came up, struggled for a couple of weeks, and by the next month, the moss was already creeping back in around the edges. I had killed the symptom and left the disease completely untouched. Because that soil under the moss was the problem the whole time. It was packed down hard as a driveway. Water would not soak in. It just sat on top in the shade and stayed damp for hours, which is the exact 5-star hotel moss dreams about. And the ground was sour and acidic from years of that same damp shade and falling maple leaves rotting into it. So I got a cheap soil test. Not a lab, not a service. A little probe kit from the garden section, about $10, the kind you push into the ground and read off a dial. That corner read down around 5.2 on the pH scale. For reference, most lawn grass wants to live between 6.0 and 7.0. Mine was sitting deep in moss territory and nowhere near where grass could win. This is the number the jug never tells you to check, because if you checked it, you would realize the jug can never fix it. Iron sulfate moss killer is actually acidic itself. Read the fine print sometime. Some of those products can nudge your soil even more acidic over time, which means every spring you spray, you are very quietly making your lawn a little bit friendlier to the next generation of moss. You are feeding the problem you think you are killing. That is not an accident. That is a customer for life. So after the baking soda cleared the moss, I hit that bare soil with the cheapest soil fix in the world. Garden lime, ground limestone. A 40-pound bag runs somewhere between $6 and $8 and lasts most people 2 or 3 years. Lime is alkaline. It slowly walks that sour pH back up toward the range where grass wins and moss starves. I raked a couple of handfuls into that bare corner, watered it in, and this time I waited before seeding. Now here's where I need to talk to you directly, because I know exactly who is watching this. Maybe you are sitting there thinking, this all sounds fine for somebody starting fresh, but your lawn is old, established, 20 years in the ground. You have got moss mixed right into living grass across half the yard, and you cannot exactly rake up your entire lawn like an old rug. You are thinking this trick is not for your situation. That is precisely the person I made the next part for, because this is where the cheap method really earns its keep. You do not need to tear anything out. You do not need a machine. You do not need a professional with a $200 quote. For moss growing mixed into living grass, the approach is a little gentler, but it is the same 2 ingredients. On a damp morning, you take that baking soda and you dust just the mossy areas, not the whole lawn. You are targeting a light hand. You let it sit 2 or 3 days until the moss browns, and then, and this is the key for an existing lawn, you rake only firmly enough to lift out the dead moss without ripping your good grass. A spring rake, a leaf rake, whatever you have got. The dead moss is loose and shallow. It gives up easily. Your grass has real roots and holds on. That raking does something the jug never does. It opens up the surface. When you pull the moss mat out, you break up that sealed, spongy layer that was holding water on top of the soil and blocking air from getting down to the roots. Turf researchers have a name for the sealed condition. They call it thatch and surface compaction, and it is one of the biggest silent reasons a lawn slowly declines in the shade. Pulling the moss is free dethatching. You are fixing drainage with a rake and a $2 box. Then you sprinkle a little lime over those same areas to sweeten the soil, water it in, and drop fresh seed right into the open spots. Because the grass now has bare contact with soil, decent drainage, and a pH climbing back toward its comfort zone, the new grass actually takes. That is the difference. You are not just killing, you are handing the space back to the grass and changing the conditions so the grass can defend it. I did this across the whole shady side of my yard over one spring, working in patches, 1 weekend at a time. Total cost for the entire project, under $15. The lawn service that knocked on my door that same season quoted me $240 for a moss treatment and overseeding plan. $240 for something I did for the price of a fast food lunch. But I promised you a measured result, and I promised you the reason the expensive iron treatments only work for a few weeks. So let me get to the research, because this is where it stopped being a hunch and started being something I could prove. Before I walk you through exactly how this powder works, I want to mention something for the homeowners who want to go deeper than one video. I put everything I have, tested the baking soda method, the soil fixes, the seeding sequences, the pH numbers into a digital guide called the Lawn Fix, and you can find it linked in the description below. It is the same no sponsor, do it for pennies approach you are getting right now, laid out start to finish, so you are not piecing it together from a dozen different places. If that sounds useful, go grab it. Now, back to the powder, because the science behind why it works is the part that finally made everything click for me. The Pacific Northwest is the moss capital of the country. Wet, shady, mild winters. And the turfgrass programs at the universities out there have studied lawn moss more seriously than just about anyone because their entire region fights it. Oregon State University and Washington State University extension programs have published guidance on moss in lawns going back decades, and the finding is remarkably consistent and remarkably inconvenient for anybody selling a jug. Their research lays it out plainly. Chemical moss controls, the iron and ferrous sulfate products, are what they classify as temporary. They kill the existing moss and nothing more. The extension literature states directly that unless you correct the underlying site conditions, the poor drainage, the excess shade, the low fertility, the compacted soil, and the acidic pH, the moss will simply return. In their own trials, the moss came back within the same season when only the chemical was used. When the site conditions were corrected, the moss stayed gone. Read that again. The university that studies moss for a living tells you the jug is temporary and the free fixes are permanent. That is not some guy on the internet. That is published extension research from the region that fights moss harder than anywhere in America. And it gets better because this is the part that made me feel a little foolish for all those years of buying killer. The measured driver of lawn moss over and over in that research is not some aggressive, invasive plant power. It is shade and moisture in soil that grass cannot handle. Reduce the shade even a little by thinning a few branches. Improve the drainage by breaking up the surface. Raise the pH with lime. Feed the grass so it grows dense. And the moss has nowhere to move in. Moss is not strong. Your grass was just weak in that spot. Fix the spot, and moss cannot compete. So now you understand why the jug is a trap. It treats the one part of the problem that does not matter, the visible green moss, and ignores every part that does. And it quietly acidifies your soil while it is at it, guaranteeing the return customer. Now here is the finale. The trick I stumbled into last, the one that ties this whole thing together and that I have almost never heard anyone mention out loud. I told you shade is one of the 4 conditions. And most people hear shade and think there is nothing they can do because you cannot exactly cut down the neighbor's oak or move your own house. I thought the same thing. That maple was not coming down. So I figured that corner would always be a losing battle. But when I went digging through the older material, the horticulture bulletins and the agricultural guidance that came out of the land-grant colleges back before the modern lawn chemical business existed, I kept running into a completely different attitude about shade. Those old manuals did not treat a shady, mossy spot as a lawn to be rescued with chemicals. They treated it as the wrong grass in the wrong place, and their fix cost almost nothing. The finale is this: match the grass to the shade and pick the seed the moss cannot outcompete. In cool regions, that means fine fescues, creeping red fescue, chewings fescue. These are the shade-tolerant grasses that the old bulletins leaned on for exactly these damp, dim corners, and they are still some of the cheapest lawn seed you can buy. A bag of fine fescue seed costs a fraction of 1 jug of moss killer. Fine fescue tolerates shade, tolerates lower fertility, and tolerates slightly acidic ground far better than the standard sun-loving blends most people blindly throw down. In other words, it thrives in the exact conditions where regular grass quits and moss takes over. I overseeded that maple corner with fine fescue after the baking soda and the lime on a cool, damp week in early fall, which the extension research pegs as the single best window for cool season seed to establish. And for the first time in 7 years, grass held that corner through the following spring. Not perfect, thick, showroom lawn, but real living grass where there had been nothing but moss for as long as I owned the house. And because that fescue actually belongs there, it defends the ground itself now. The moss cannot find the empty space anymore. That is the whole secret the jug will never tell you. You do not conquer moss. You make your lawn a place moss cannot afford to live. $2 baking soda to clear it, a few dollars of lime to sweeten the soil, a rake to open the surface, and the right cheap seed to hold the ground for good. The industry sold you a forever war. The old bulletins and the university research quietly held the peace treaty the whole time. Let me walk you through exactly how I would do it, start to finish, if I were standing in your yard this weekend, so you have got the whole thing in order. First, wait for a damp morning. Dew on the ground is perfect. Take your plain baking soda and dust the mossy areas with a light, even, visible white haze. Not a pile, a dusting like flour on a countertop. Hit only the moss. You do not need to treat healthy grass. Give it 2 to 4 days. Watch the moss turn from green to yellow to brown. When it looks dead and crispy, take a rake and pull it out with just enough pressure to lift the dead moss and not tear your good grass. On a bare mossy patch, you can rake harder. Mixed into living lawn, go gentle and let the dead moss come up on its own. While you have got that surface opened up, this is your one chance to fix the real problem, so do not skip it. Grab a cheap soil probe and check your pH in the mossy zones. If you are sitting below 6, spread a couple of handfuls of garden lime over the area and water it in. That is your long-term insurance. That is the step that stops the moss from ever fully coming back. Then seed. In the cool regions, reach for fine fescue for shade, or a good shade blend if that is what your store carries. Scatter it onto the bare, open soil so it makes real contact with the ground, and keep it damp while it germinates. Fall is the best window if you can wait for it. Early fall when the nights cool down but the soil is still warm. Spring works too if fall has passed. And here is the part people forget. Look up. If you can thin out even a couple of low branches to let a little more light into that corner, do it. You do not need to cut down a tree. Every extra hour of morning sun dries the ground faster and tips the balance further toward your grass and away from the moss. The old bulletins were obsessed with this, and they were right. Light and drainage do more permanent good than any bottle you can buy. Now let me be straight with you about one thing, because I do not sell you fairy tales on this channel. Baking soda is a wonderful, cheap moss remover. It is not a miracle that fixes bad soil by itself. If you dust the moss, kill it, and then walk away and do nothing about the drainage and the pH and the shade, the moss will come back and you will think the trick failed. The trick did not fail. You just did the first step and skipped the ones that matter. The baking soda buys you the open ground. What you do with that open ground over the next 2 weeks decides whether you win for a season or win for good. And do not go overboard dumping baking soda across your entire lawn like it is fertilizer. It is not. Sodium in big amounts is not something you want soaking your whole yard, because too much sodium is hard on soil structure over time. This is a targeted tool. You spot treat the moss, not the whole lawn. A light dusting on the problem areas, a few times a season at most. Used that way, it is safe, it is cheap, and it is effective. Used like you are salting a driveway, you would be trading one problem for another. Precision is the whole game here. Think about the money for a second, because it still stuns me. Over those 6 wasted years, I spent close to $200 on moss killer that never solved anything, plus my time hauling jugs home every spring, plus the $240 service quote I almost said yes to out of pure frustration, added up and I was staring at real money for a problem that a $2 box and a $7 bag of lime handled permanently. The whole permanent fix for my entire shady side came in under $15 and a couple of quiet weekend mornings. That is the part that stays with me. It was never about a stronger chemical. It was never about a better jug. The answer was cheaper than the problem the entire time. It was sitting in my kitchen. It was written down in old college bulletins that predate the whole modern lawn care aisle. It was confirmed in plain language by the very universities that study moss for a living. And it got buried under decades of shiny packaging and spring sales, because there is simply no profit in telling a man to check his soil and sweeten his dirt. So the next time you walk past that soft green patch on the shady side of your house, I want you to see it differently. It is not an enemy that beat you. It is a note your lawn left you, telling you the ground got too sour, too packed, too dark, and too wet for grass to hold on. Answer that note, and the moss packs up and leaves on its own. Here is what I really hope you take from all of this. That spongy patch was never a sign you needed to spend more. It was a sign somebody made a simple thing complicated so they could sell you the cure to it over and over, one spring at a time. You just took that back for $2. If you are the kind of homeowner who would rather understand your own yard than keep renting a solution from a shelf, you and I are cut from the same cloth. This whole channel is built for people who got tired of being sold to over their own front lawn. Now I want to hear from you. Go check the shady, mossy corner of your yard and tell me one thing in the comments. What is your soil pH read when you probe it? I am betting a whole lot of you come back and tell me you are sitting down around 5 point something, right in moss country, and I want to see just how common it really is across everybody watching. Drop that number below, let us find out together. And if this is the kind of honest, no sponsor, do it for pennies lawn advice you have been looking for, come along with us. This is a growing crew of homeowners who flat out refuse to keep overpaying for their own yards. Next time, I am going to show you the 50-cent pantry ingredient I use to green up a yellow, tired patch of lawn in about 10 days without a single bag of chemical fertilizer, and why the timing on that one matters more than the amount. You are not going to want to miss how simple it turned out to be. This video showed you why the moss is there. But inside the Honest Lawn Circle, I walk you through the full baking soda moss fix, patch by patch, the steps I couldn't fit here. And when a spot won't budge, you ask me directly, and I answer you myself. No robot. You won't be doing this alone. You'll belong with lawn keepers just like you. Just point your phone at the code. Cancel anytime. I'd love to have you. Now that you've handled the moss, let's fix those bare brown spots too. In the next video, I'll show you the simple thing to pour on them for fresh green grass in just 2 weeks. It's starting right here.